being announced, you'll have. And now I've got the pleasure of introducing Tyler. Tyler Sniff is a late discovery donor conceived person who originally hails from Ohio. He acts as General Counsel for the U.S. Donor Conceived Coalition, ensuring compliance with relevant rules and regulations, and drafting and reviewing legal documents for the organization. He also helps develop legislation proposed by the USDCC and worked with us closely on the fertility fraud legislation that we got passed in Ohio in December 2022. By day, Tyler is an attorney for the EPA. He earned a degree in physics from Furman University, where he also studied genetics. Tyler lives in Atlanta and enjoys spending time with his family, listening to jazz and golfing, and he's multi-talented. He also plays the saxophone. So with that, I will give you Tyler.
That's generous of you. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name's Tyler. As Betsy said, I'm originally from the great state of Ohio. I grew up in a small town, sort of near Wadsworth in Medina County, Sharon Center to be exact. So if anybody knows where Sharon Center is, send me a message or an email. I'd love to hear about that. As Betsy said, I am a late discovery donor conceived person. I discovered that I was donor conceived in my early 30s as a result of a DNA test that was given to me as a gift. As you can imagine, that was quite shocking and ultimately led me to get involved, take some of my legal skills and try and apply them for advancing the interest of donor conceived people. And I guess to share a little bit about my personal story, I'm the oldest of six. There's twins and triplets in me and my family, and we're all six of us were conceived with the same anonymous sperm donor, which is kind of unusual to have all the siblings share the same donor. At any rate, I'm here tonight to talk about advocacy around donor conception issues in the U.S. I guess just before I have some slides, but just before I get into the slides, I just want to kind of talk briefly about donor conception and what it is, and donor conception is basically the use of a third party in assisted reproduction procedures. And so this could be a sperm donor, it could be an egg donor, it could be an embryo that's being donated by a couple. There's been a lot of talk in the news about embryos with the Alabama decision, which I'm sure many of you heard about. So, it can be many different kinds of things. Nobody knows exactly how many donor conceived people are in the U.S. They do track to some extent the number of people conceived with egg donors, but sperm donors, people conceived with sperm donors, those statistics aren't kept. And so some people estimate there's over 1 million donor conceived people in the United States, many of whom have no idea that they're donor conceived. And I'm going to pull these slides up, so bear with me just a second. Okay. As I try and get the technology to work. Okay. All right. Can everybody see those slides? If you just nod your head. Okay, good. Thank you. So the organization that I'm a part of is the U.S. Donor Conceived Council. This is the first nonprofit in the United States founded and led by donor conceived people to advance their interests, including through legislation. There are some other organizations that do work on donor conceived issues, and there's even another organization founded by donor conceived people. They mostly focus on like um, support, and mental health and education. And the name of that organization is Donor Conceived Community, which is kind of confusing because both organizations are DCC. So, but that's a great organization. I just wanted to mention them so that I don't leave them out of this presentation. And I encourage you to check them out, especially if anybody in your family or you are touched by donor conception. They have a lot of great support groups. So our organization was founded a couple years ago, U.S. Donor Conceived Council, to really be more the advocacy, uh, take on the advocacy work. So we do some education, and we do provide resources to the community, but we also advocate for greater regulation of the industry. Our biggest achievement so far has been the first year that we were incorporated. We were thrown into the deep end very quickly. We were able to pass a law in Colorado that effectively banned anonymous egg and sperm donation, and that was the first law of its kind in the United States. There's been several other countries in the world that have banned anonymous gamete donation. I think Sweden might have been one of the first in the 80s. The United Kingdom, I think, did it in 2005. And there's several other countries, Australia, Germany, France. And so I just bring those other countries up. Um, I know we're talking about the United States tonight, but I think it's useful because it kind of shows that the U.S. has really taken a different approach when it comes to regulating donor conception than some other countries. Um, and in my opinion, we lag behind in terms of like appropriate regulation of this industry. Um, so a little bit about this law, the Donor Conceived Persons Protection Act. It was enacted in 2022. We're really proud that it was almost unanimously passed. I think we had one no vote, and we had bipartisan sponsors as well. The law doesn't go in effect till 2025. Um, and while it's a lengthy law, I'm going to boil it down to kind of 5 things that it did. One was it banned anonymous gamete donation for any donor eggs or donor sperm that are used in Colorado. So this would include like companies that ship donor sperm or donor eggs into the state. Um, so starting in 2025, any donor eggs or donor sperm that were collected after that date would need to be, the donors would need to be agreed to have their identities released when an adult donor conceived person requests the information. So the disclosure of the information is not mandatory. It's only if the donor conceived person turns 18 and they know they're donor conceived because hopefully their parents have told them, and they're curious and want to get the information, they then would be able to request the information. A few other things that we were able to get done was, for the first time in the United States, we set a limit on the number of offspring per donor. And the way this was accomplished was not limiting the number of children that families can have, because a lot of times, that's beneficial to donor conceived people to have another sibling. Um, and so um, the way in which we accomplished that was through a family limit. And what that is a limit on the number of families that can be created through one donor. And so within each family, the family can have as many children as they want. Like my family, we have 6 kids. You can have 6 kids, but there can be no more, under this law, there can be no more than 25 families created per donor. So it's still quite a large number. It's honestly larger than we were hoping for, but we had to compromise and negotiate during the legislative process. And this was a number that both us and the industry were willing to agree on, and we felt like moved the needle, because previously there had been no cap at all in the United States. And we've had several news reports of uh, groups of donor conceived people sharing the same donor, where you have 100 or 200 people sharing the same donor. So you can imagine that's quite overwhelming for both the donor conceived person and the donor when you have dozens, if not hundreds, of people, uh, communicating with each other. Um, Another big issue that we tackled is medical updates. So similar to adoptees who may not have access to accurate family medical history, donor conceived people are often denied being able to know half of their family medical history, on the donor side, that is. While there's been some laws in other states that have required the collection of medical information and then the disclosure, none of those laws required that information to be updated. And so what we were able to accomplish is to basically say once every 3 years, the sperm banks and the egg banks have to reach out to donors and ask them if there's any, significant new medical conditions that they're aware of. And we feel this is really important because even with an ID release at 18 donor, the donor is not required to communicate anything to the donor conceived person. Um, so even with identity disclosure, you may not be able to obtain uh, family medical history directly from the donor. So you might have to just settle for what the bank has. And so that's one reason the updates are important. Another reason the updates are important is because many donors are very young when they are recruited by the industry. It's no secret, a lot of them are college students, and a lot of diseases, complex diseases, um, which have a high heritability, they don't manifest until later in life. And so um, it's important to have those medical updates for that reason as well. Um, Two other things we were able to do, that I'll touch on tonight is we were able to set a minimum age for donors um, in the state of Colorado. So if you are a donor in Colorado, or if you're a donor outside of Colorado and the company ships your genetic material into the state, you have to be at least 21 years old to be a donor. Um, and you would be surprised, there were a fair number of people being recruited to be donors who were, still teenagers, 18, 19 years old, which is quite shocking. It's a huge decision to make when you're 18 years old. And we just felt like uh, a minimum age of 21 would be beneficial to everybody involved in donor conception, in terms of trying to get donors who have thought through the implications of what donation means. And then the last thing I'll talk about is educational materials. So the law requires the state, in cooperation with stakeholders, to come up with educational materials for intended parents and donors about issues of concern to donor conceived people. So this could be things like the medical updates, or letting parents know that research has shown that it's best to be truthful and transparent to your child in terms of letting them know that they're donor conceived, um, things of that nature. And so we're in the process of working on those materials right now. Um, I did want to note that we could not have done this law without the help of adoptees. One of the main arguments that we made to legislators was the comparison between adoption and donor conception. Obviously, the two are not the same thing. There are some parallels, some important similarities, and obviously some important differences. but one argument or one similarity that we really hammered on was that in Colorado, adult adoptees could get their original birth certificate. So, it was easy to just kind of tell legislators like, look, we're just trying to do what was done for adoptees. This battle has been fought before. It's a similar battle. And so we were able to get a lot of support, I think quickly because of that. And thanks to two adoptees in particular, Shane Madsen, and Richard Erlob, which Rich, I hope I didn't butcher your name. But we worked very closely with them, and they were so helpful in guiding us through the process. Like I said, we were a young organization just kind of thrown into the fire. And they really knew how the sausage gets made, and were able to teach us about that. So I want just to talk about a few things that we've done in terms of advocacy in the U.S. And Betsy, how am I doing on time?
So you're good. You're fine. Keep going.
Okay. Um, One thing we did is there's not really good information about sperm banks in terms of their practices. And so one thing we did is in 2023, we did a survey of all the sperm banks in the United States. So we reached out to them and collected information on their website about their policies, asked them, this is what you say your policies are, is this in fact true? And try and get them to verify that. Sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't. But the big takeaway from our survey, which we're in the process of updating, is that the U.S. sperm banks um, follow a variety of policies that are highly inconsistent with each other. Meaning they vary a lot from bank to bank. One bank may have like no limit on the number of offspring per donor, and another bank may have a low limit of like 10 families per donor. Um, and they also it also varies a lot in terms of their adherence to non-binding industry guidelines. So the industry is always fond of saying that there is a trade group called the American Society for Reproductive Medicine that issues these non-binding guidelines on donor conception, things like recommended, ages for donors and recommendations about medical issues, things that we just kind of talked about. But what we found is that the sperm banks are really very few of them follow all the guidelines, and uh, and so that just kind of confirmed what we had suspected, which was that the self-regulation is kind of a misnomer. And we took that information and we tried to help the community in terms of like visualizing this information. And so we created a little resource here, which we call the traffic light chart. And this is intended for like hopeful parents who are considering a bank, just so they can kind of look at some of these big issues like family limits or whether they have identity release donors, and kind of see, okay, the green is the better banks, the red is obviously the worst practices as far as we're concerned. And so we are in the process of updating this, but we were proud to collect this information for the community. Another big thing we did last year was we worked to amend what's called the Uniform Parentage Act. So this is a really important piece of model legislation that exists in the United States. And the purpose of the UPA is to provide laws and rules around how you become a parent, the different ways in which you can become a parent, how you can secure your rights as a parent. And this is really important in particular for members of the LGBTQ community, who face a lot of hurdles in becoming parents, and including the hurdles that are put up by the law. And so, in particular, like if you have a couple, say a lesbian couple, and one of them is a non is one of the intended parents, but is not going to be the biological parent, the UPA helps establish parental rights for that person, despite the fact that they're not a biological parent. They're still the raising intended parent and the legal parent. And so that's really important, is to that community, as well as to what's called the single mothers by choice community. And so that's like single women who decide they want to have children and use a donor to conceive. Previously, the UPA allowed for anonymity, and what we were advocating for was to update the UPA to get rid of that, so that it would require, in all cases, identity release donors. And this is just a little graphic showing the state of affairs as far as where the UPA has been enacted. You can see the more recent amendments tend to focus on states in the Northeast and the West Coast. And we're working to change that. We're trying to, we were able to succeed in getting the Uniform Law Commission to amend the UPA to require identity release. So that's really amazing news. The next, people always ask me then, well, it's the law now, right? And no, that's just the start of the process. So the UPA is a model statute, and then you have to take that to each state and get that state legislature to enact that model. And so we're working in multiple states to try and accomplish that. And we hope to do that in Ohio as well. So I had a few slides on why the UPA should have been amended. And I don't want to go through all this, but I did want to just touch on some of the research. This is from our presentation to the Uniform Law Commission. And we included some research that I think is important for people who are interested in donor conception and these issues to know about. And that is that researchers found a substantial percentage of eligible donor conceived people, so donor conceived people who had an ID released donor, once they become adults, a substantial percentage of them actually do in fact request the donor's identity. Interestingly, non-identifying information was found to be inadequate to satisfy the information needs of the donor conceived individuals. And this is really critical in terms of why it's important to get rid of anonymity. So most of the requesting donor conceived people wanted to learn more about the donor, and most requesting donor conceived people were interested in actually contacting the donor. So non-identifying information wouldn't allow either of those to take place. You could learn some about the donor from non-identifying information, but not as much as they wanted. And then they also wanted to actually have some communication with the donor. And so what it comes down to is we don't know which donor conceived people are going to want the information. And so it needs to be mandatory across the board. It needs to be that every donor is identity released at 18, so that any donor conceived people that want the information can have the option to access the information. And this is about giving donor conceived people greater autonomy to decide for themselves what the information means to them, because for a lot of years it's been the case that it was decided for us how important this information should be, which in many cases our parents deemed that it wasn't important to tell us at all. Obviously times have changed, and so some people don't care. Some donor conceived people care quite a bit, and then there's everybody, and there's a whole spectrum in between. And so you're just not going to know which people are going to want the information, and that's why it needs to be mandatory. Um, and I want to emphasize, it's not mandatory that the donor's information be released. It's just mandatory that they agree that if a donor conceived person comes forward as an adult, they can request information and it can be given to them. So it's not once the donor conceived people turn 18, the information's automatically released to everybody. That's not how this works. This slide just makes the basic point, which a lot of us know, which is, we're living in the DNA revolution now, and every year that goes by, the advances in genetics, human genetics, and genomics are astounding. And one of those in the past few years has been the growth of home DNA test kits that you can take for fun, either through Ancestry or 23andMe or some other companies. And for a fairly low price, you can be connected to your genetic relatives. And so the upshot of this is that this DNA testing has become so popular. I think the last estimate was like somewhere north of 40 million people in the United States have done this. Um, and so when that many people do it, the upshot of that is that donors are no longer anonymous. It's anonymity is illusory, because basically what you can do is, even if say you're a donor conceived person, say the donor doesn't test, but their uncle does or their nephew does, like all it takes is one of their family members to test, and you can, in a lot of cases, trace back to the donor and figure out the connection. But an important point to know is that some people say, well, if that's the case, why do you need laws to require identity release? You can just do a DNA test. And the thing is that donor conceived people shouldn't have to resort to a DNA test to identify the donor. A lot of people don't want to do these DNA tests because you do have to give up some of your personal information to these companies. And in some cases, it's still, despite it being possible in many cases to track that link, in some cases it's very difficult and there's some uncertainty. And so, again, people shouldn't have to resort to becoming experts in genetics and genealogy just to identify who the donor is. And then the third thing is that I wanted to educate this group about is that we argued to the Uniform Law Commission that mandatory identity release would not destroy the supply of donor sperm or donor eggs. This is an argument that we come up against a lot in our advocacy work, because we do recognize donor conception is an important way in which people build families, and it is expensive already. And so we want to be sensitive that regulation doesn't completely destroy the supply of donor sperm and eggs that allows a lot of people struggling with infertility to start a family. And we were able to show that that's not that concern shouldn't stand in the way of ID release. Several sperm banks and some egg banks have already moved in this direction. Research on egg donors have shown that egg donors in particular, most of them prefer to be identity release. And then in some of the larger countries that have banned anonymity, they have not seen a decrease in supply of donor sperm. And this chart is from the United Kingdom, just showing that. Okay, so thanks for bearing with me through that. I just wanted to kind of take one of the biggest issues for us, which is identity release, and kind of show you how we've been advocating around that issue. In terms of working on the UPA, and then then going to different states to work on the issue. Last year we worked on implementation of the Colorado law. So a lot of people think you pass a law and, oh, that's it, everything should be solved, right? Well, the truth is that it takes a lot of work and energy and resources to start a regulatory program from scratch. And so we've spent a lot of time trying to help the state agency get the program up and running. So we've been working on the implementing regulations, and the educational materials and things of that nature. And that work's going to continue on into this year as well. I think a cool thing that we've done, the council's done, is launched an Ask a Therapist feature. And so in our community, there's a shortage of professionals who are mental health professionals who are like trained in these issues. And so we wanted to give the public a resource where they could submit questions anonymously to mental health professionals with that experience, and get some potential advice. So I encourage you to check out that feature, especially if you have any friends or family members that are considering donor conception, or struggling with various aspects of it. Kind of relatedly, we have set up a group of mental health professionals who can work together, kind of be a resource for each other on these issues. And so that's another really exciting initiative that we launched last year. I'm going to forward. Well, actually, I'm going to touch on this. I think this is a really cool project we did. Part of advocacy is not just like passing laws and regulations. It's like education as well, because a lot of times you have to change hearts and minds before you can even make progress in passing a law. And so one of the things we want to do is, in the world of egg donation, there has been concern about how that industry's operated in terms of how they treat potential donors, that whether there's truly informed consent, um, or is there some in some cases, is there coercion or undue influence on people to become donors or donate more times than they feel comfortable with. And so we created a mini series, which I encourage you to watch. It's on YouTube, and it's like, I think it's a 9-part mini series, 7 or 9-part mini series, and it talks to various people involved in egg donation, and just tries to um, provide another perspective that hasn't been shown to members of the public. We were able to raise enough funds last year to attend the industry trade group's big annual conference, and that's the ASRM Expo and Conference, which was in New Orleans this past year. And this is a picture of one of our board members, Melissa, who's egg donor conceived, and she was able to go to the conference. And this is really important for our advocacy work, because it's really important to forge relationships inside the industry to try and work from within, not just from the outside in terms of legislation, but also trying to change hearts and minds of people that are working in this industry on a daily basis. And I think our trip to ASRM showed that there's just a ton of work that remains to be done in that area. Let's see. Then the last kind of advocacy thing that I wanted to talk about is we launched a college campus project, which is basically because college campuses are such a focus of the industry. You know, if you take a map and you map some of the biggest colleges or most prestigious colleges, and then map next to that where the sperm and egg bank locations are, they're in very close proximity to each other. And so because of that, we thought it would be a good idea to try and get on those campuses and provide some um, information from our perspective on the issues. And so we've been able, I think we've gone to a couple universities at this point, and basically just a donor conceived person and a former donor just give a talk about the issues, and just so people know, you know, if this is something you're thinking about, here's some things that you might want to know. And so we're really excited about that project and trying to grow that. So what are we going to be doing in the US looking ahead as far as advocacy goes? I'm just going to briefly mention these. We're trying to expand our organization. We're trying to continue our legislative work, and build out those mental health programs, because that's a huge part of the need is greater mental health resources for donors, donor conceived people, and parents. And then we're actually this year really excited to announce that we will be going again to the ASRM conference, which is being held in Denver this year. And we're going to have our own booth there. And so that's really, if for anybody who's gone to these conferences, you know, that's no small feat to raise the funds necessary to have a booth there. So we, you know, our goal in that is to, again, to have our presence be felt, and to try and make more connections and relationships with inside the industry. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that you have. If I rush through something, feel free to ask me to explain it again, or if I use the term you're not familiar with. There's no stupid questions. I never thought in my wildest imagination I'd be talking about eggs and sperm so much, and having to learn about all these different terms and procedures and things. But here, you know, life takes you in weird directions, as we all know. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm excited to see what questions you may have.
Thank you, Tyler. There you go. Okay. So we don't have any questions in chat yet, but I do have a few that I jotted down while you were talking. Thank you for all that information. So interesting. And we just to let people know, we are ramping up here in Ohio to have a bill introduced to donor identification, the exact topic that Tyler was talking about, outlawing anonymous gametes in Ohio, that would mirror that portion of the law in Colorado. We're not looking at doing all of the pieces all at once, so carving that out to do the donor ID piece first. Hopefully that'll be introduced this year, I would say next year, the latest. So we're really excited about that, and Tyler's been really helpful.
And if I could jump in real quick and just say, like, how grateful our community is to have the support of groups like Adoption Network Cleveland and adoptees. You know, the two things, like I said, are not the same, but there are some similarities. And just speaking for myself, I found it so empowering and a source of strength to talk to adoptees who have fought these battles before, and to learn from them and have them stand next to us in our struggle. It just has meant meant a tremendous amount. So I just wanted to say thank you to Betsy and Adoption Network Cleveland for working with us on these issues.
Thank you. I was thrilled to be able to introduce you to Rich when you mentioned that you were going to be working in Colorado. So I'm glad that worked out to the degree that it did. So things that caught my eye, and you addressed this a little bit, but 25 families is still an awful lot, especially if you look at those families having probably multiple children. Has there been talk about having geography added on to that, a certain number of families or people produced within a certain mileage or geographic area?
There has been in one state, I think they're considering possibly doing uh, something along those lines where there would be an overall limit, and then within that major metropolitan area, having a smaller sublimit. So that hasn't made its way into law yet, but it's just kind of being explored. So ASRM does have a recommendation of no more than I think 25 offspring per population of like 800,000 or something. But when you do the math, like that would allow hundreds of offspring per donor. So I just bring that up to show you that the industry's own guideline is very uh, meaningless and not, it doesn't support, it doesn't, it's not, it doesn't have the interests of donor conceived people in mind.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we see, more and more examples with, the amount of offspring that Dr. Klein had in the Indianapolis area. There was just an article in the news a couple weeks ago on CNN about a woman, a donor-conceived woman who dated a half-sibling in high school, obviously not knowing at that point that they were both donor-conceived and related.
That was a
Uh,
huge story, and that she is so brave. Her name's Victoria, and um, that, as far as I know, that's the first case in the U.S. that's been made public of, what we call accidental incest, which would be, um, two half siblings having a romantic relationship with each other. And, you know, the reason that was so significant for her to come forward is a lot of donor conceived people, that is a source of anxiety and stress, is constantly thinking, oh, I might, is this person, like, am I related to this person? Like, I really like this person, but now do I have to talk to him about taking a genetic test? And so, while the industry likes to say there's a very low chance of it happening, I think the reality is nobody knows how common it is. And even if it is not very common, you still have that psychological stress component, which is you just don't know. So I think one of the benefits of having a limit is to give people some peace of mind, even if it's not the number that we would like. It at least hopefully will give people some peace of mind that it's not going to be the worst case scenario like we're hearing in some of these news stories.
I mean, you're thinking about all the people who could be produced from one donor, and they're typically, in a pretty narrow age range, right? So somebody might be donating for 5 years or 10 years, and so the half siblings are all going to be around the same age. So if they're in the same community, they would be going to probably the same high school and that type of thing. So
Yeah,
I
it's
don't think
funny.
people always stop to think.
It's just funny how uh, things happen, but yeah, I mean, like, just for me, for example, it turned out that a couple of my best high school friends, like when I went public in my advocacy work around these issues, like, they saw it and reached out to me and said, "Oh my gosh, Tyler, like, we're donor conceived too." And these are like two of my very best friends. And it's like none of us had any idea growing up. So yeah, it is kind of wild, how the geography works out.
Yeah. Yeah. And think of all the people that you might know that are donor conceived but don't know that about themselves at this point in time.
Hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about, just because, with adoption, I think it's going to be a little bit different in terms of donor identification. Can you talk a little bit about exactly what is released? So a big part of my life was getting original birth certificates able to be released upon request to adult adoptees. That's a very tangible item that, is filled out in a systematic way.
Hmm.
Obviously, with donor conception, it's probably a little different.
Yeah, it is. So when donors are not put on birth certificates, um, that's just the intended parents, uh, and that's all fine and good. Um, so we don't approach it from the birth certificate angle. So really, what we try and do is we try and put the onus on the industry to collect the identifying information. So this would be the person's name, date of birth, and some sort of contact information, their last address, um, uh, an email address, which is really important nowadays, obviously, a phone number. And so um, I believe that the regulations we're working on in Colorado would require the release of all of those things. It would require the release not just of the person's name, but also to the extent that the banks had collected, which they're supposed to under this law, they would also release the donor's birthday, um, and last known address and some way to try and contact them.
Social security number or no?
No, no social security number, no, nothing like that. So
Mhm.
it's pretty minimal amount of information again, um, and that goes back to the research that as to why identity release is so important is like, um, there's only so much you can learn from like a piece of paper. And
Mhm.
so this information, the idea is that it would allow the person to start their search, be able to identify the donor and then reach out to them.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about how much changes in somebody's life over 18, 25, 30 years between when they gave that phone number, that email address, and if you still have it 25 years later. Um,
Yeah, and
so
that's one of the reasons for the update provisions is to try and make sure that information is updated from time to time.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think it's important to recognize there is no perfect system, and I'm sure this is true in the context of birth certificates for adoptees because a lot of times you probably just have like what, just a name and that's it, right? Maybe a birthday and a name.
Actually, not even, yeah, the adoptee's birthday, not the parents, but usually there's an address, their age at the time of the birth, um, where the child was born, which might have made it onto the amended or not. So
Yeah, and so that
a little bit more.
information is obviously dated
Right.
and
It needs to be updated. People have married, changed their name, moved. Um, so yeah, but it's a starting place.
Mhm.
We got a quiet bunch tonight, so we have about 10 more minutes. If anybody has a burning question, please do post it in the chat. I have a couple other questions myself, so I'll just keep going if we don't have any in chat. Um, the mental health professional networking and ask a therapist, I thought that was brilliant. And I think, that's, I can see how that would be a real gap in knowledge and there aren't specialists necessarily yet developed or enough specialists. And so you probably have a lot of donor conceived people seeking assistance and not being sure where to go,
and a
and
lot of the
therapists not being sure how to handle all that.
absolutely. And I was just thinking, you made me think about how a lot of the mental health professionals that do have experience in this area, a lot of them work for the industry. And
Mhm.
so even in that case, they have, mm, maybe not as broad a perspective as one would like if you were looking for a resource for a parent or a donor conceived person. So yeah, it's a huge need, and we're trying to to address it. And then the other organization I mentioned is working on that as well, Donor Conceived Community. And I encourage everybody to check them out as well.
Is the professional networking piece, I assume that's online, and so people could
Mhm.
find each other from different communities. Because I know, licenses are state by state, and so, uh, you know,
Yeah,
somebody needs to find a therapist in their own state.
it's a virtual support group for mental health professionals. And so if there's anybody listening tonight or listens to this that is a mental health professional and would like to make that a part of their practice or learn more about it, like I would encourage you to reach out to that group. We definitely need more therapists that can can provide people support around these issues. Like I said, there's most people probably most donor conceived people probably don't even know that they're donor conceived. So there's
Mm.
more and more people discovering this every day. And I don't think the resources, the mental health resources are there to support that population.
Mm. That's something that we could certainly post about. There's been probably just in the last 20 years a real effort to educate therapists around adoption issues. And a lot of that is educating them to work with families who have kids who are adopted, which is important. But there's even fewer therapists who uh, work with adult adoptees or birth parents, years after the fact, and are really skilled in that. And so training programs, therapist networking are very useful. We keep a referral list at our office of therapists who
Oh,
um,
nice.
people could check into if they're seeking assistance. We always try to give more than one name because people are going to have a different fit necessarily from
Mm-hmm.
um, other people, but
Mm-hmm.
there's it's not a real long list. For years it was literally two or three people. It's expanded a little bit from there now, but it's
It's funny, and when I had my discovery, I think I probably made contact with somebody on that list, and that was because all I could find was a therapist that was familiar with working with adoptees, and so
Mhm.
I couldn't find anybody who advertised on their website, oh, I work with donor conceived people or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a huge need.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Well, we'll make sure we help you get the word out on that. I think that's really important. Any last comments, Tyler, or anything else you think people should know before we start wrapping up?
Um, I just want to thank everybody for listening and come back to I feel I'm not an adoptee, and obviously adoptee and donor conception are not the same thing, but I feel such I guess, an affinity towards the adoptee community, and I think a lot of us in our community feel that as well. And just are so grateful to be able to learn from y'all, your community, and try and have it help us in our advocacy efforts. And so, if you're interested in getting involved, um, you can find out how to reach us on our website. We're easy to get a hold of. Um, we have a great need for volunteers. You don't have to be donor conceived. You can be a parent, you can be an adoptee, you can be whatever, and you can help us out. So if you're itching to get involved, by all means reach out. And then I have to do my shameless plug for donations, which is we're an all volunteer organization. None of our funds go to staff salaries or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we are very grassroots and we rely heavily on grassroots donations. So if you're so inclined, please visit our website and consider making a donation. It's tax deductible, and we'd be very thankful for that. And that's it. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Kelly. Can you give your website verbally? I tried to post it and it wasn't showing up
It's
as a link.
www.usdcc.org. Again,
Okay,
www.usdcc.org. And yeah, if you have trouble finding us, like reach out to me, or I'll put Betsy out there as well, and we'll try and get you the right place.
totally fine. Okay, I did put a link in the chat for a quick survey. We like to get people's thoughts at the end of each program, and know how how this landed for you, and then also what thoughts you might have for future programs for us. Tyler, you're getting lots of praise in the chat, so you can take a look at that. I also put the link of where you can see both upcoming Monday evening speakers and also a link from there to the YouTube channel where you can see past Monday evening speakers. You can listen to these like podcasts. We've got quite a collection. This is something we've been doing for almost 4 years now. You can join us tomorrow evening for a rare event. We're having another Monday evening tomorrow on a Tuesday evening. We have a local therapist, speaking of therapists in the field, who runs a group every Monday, and he was not able to join us, but we know how wonderful he is. That's Dr. Tom Rogat, and he's going to be talking about navigating relationships as an adult adopted person. So please join us for that. Thank you to Tyler for volunteering your time this evening. And just like Tyler's shameless plug, Adoption Network is also a small nonprofit organization. We do lots of different things in terms of support and advocacy and education. Many different programs that you can see on our website, which is adoptionnetwork.org. We are a membership organization, and members keep it going to make sure that we're here to keep doing what we do. So if you haven't joined us and you're interested, please check that out on our website. And you can also check out our ongoing programs at adoptionnetwork.org. So thank you very much for being here this evening, everybody. Have a good rest of your night.